Hello, everyone. So it's a really special day. It's our first conference as a open source project and as a company. So I think that's a huge milestone that we're super excited to hit. So really appreciate all of you being here. So today I'm going to talk about the state of Gatsby, a little bit about kind of how we got to this point in time on the web. And kind of our short-term roadmap and kind of long-term, kind of what is the vision of the web that we see that's happening. So first, as Lynn said, my name is Kyle Matthews. I'm the founder of the open source project and co-founder of the company. And first conference. And so really pleased all of you here. And so today it's pretty obvious to a lot of people that the monolith CMS is dying. And the future is what we call the content mesh. And if you look at this fairly typical website, in the past this would have been built from a CMS, but today it's composed of like a number of different services that kind of pull together in one place. So we have Cloudinary, Algolia, Contentful, Stripe, and so forth. And which is amazing because the content mesh enables us to manage data and add functionality using purpose-built tools. It's not a kind of a one-size-fits-all CMS that we try to like jam and make fit. It allows us to load data from anywhere that the data might live, and also lets us build UIs that are combining multiple data sources in one service, one website. But it's also terrible. It can have atrocious performance pitfalls. If you're loading data at runtime from a bunch of different places, the slowest API is going to drag down your website. Also, the logic around combining these different data sources can get quite complex. And also, UIs can get tightly coupled to backends, and like state management can get very complex as well. So the question is then how to tame the content mesh. First, it's like you centralize data access with GraphQL, and you serve only optimized static assets. GraphQL is amazing, which I guess all of you have experienced GraphQL probably at this point. You have better explorability, single source of truth. It's more scalable and team-friendly. Also, it's like a very consistent, shareable dev workflow. So instead of having undocumented, fairly random data APIs, everyone has the same APIs. They're all documented. It's very easy to kind of onboard new people and so on and so forth. Also, static's amazing. You get blazing fast performance without having to do particularly anything, and simpler deployment flow and reduced DevOps. So Gatsby, we use Node APIs to load any data source into GraphQL, and then we early bind data at build time. So we say at build time we know what every page needs for data. It means we can like optimize a lot of the loading of the data into the website. We generate static assets and automate performance tuning and deploy to a CDN, so that all of the resources for the website are very close to the actual end user. And then also we rehydrate to a React app in the browser, with the whole goal being make the right thing the easy thing. We all of course want to create wonderful web experiences for our users, and Gatsby tries as much as possible to make that the easy thing to do. So design your tools so the laziest, shortcuttiest, under the gunniest decisions a developer can make will still result in excellent user experience. So a lot of people think though, so if Gatsby is a static site generator and my site has dynamic data, that means like, the two aren't a good fit. But we'd like to emphasize that like static assets does not mean a static apps. React apps are dynamic, obviously, and Gatsby sites are React apps, which means that all Gatsby sites are by default are dynamic. So this is a little diagram that Jason Linksdorf, a developer person, put together. I really like. So you have like these different services, and they can all be kind of composed into a Gatsby site. You probably don't necessarily want to use all those at the same time, but you might. Who knows? You could use Contentful, WordPress. What are those? Shopify, GitHub, a few of those. Anyways, and so Gatsby combines those all together and generates like React code as well as GraphQL data. And then those are pushed to a CDN, and then And the last step is that gets loaded into users' browsers as React apps. Cool. So that's a short intro to Gatsby. So now let's talk about like where are we at as a project. Healthy is a good word for it. So we have 6 full-time maintainers working on open source, and we're hiring more actually at the moment. And we're getting hundreds of contributions per month from the community. So it's very, very active community, and lots of improvements happening all the time, which is really fun and exciting to see. We also, so as a company, we're obviously the kind of main contributors to the project, and so we have multiple years of funding secured. So whatever happens, Gatsby is going to keep pushing forward for multiple years in the future. We're also launching a paid commercial product soon. Gatsby v2 was released in September, and highlights of the release: we reduced build time by up to 75%. The JavaScript runtime shrunk quite a bit, so kind of like the core JavaScript bundle size that like ships with every Gatsby site. And also we upgraded Gatsby to the latest dependencies of Webpack, Babel, and React. Ecosystem, a big part of why people use Gatsby, of course, is the ecosystem. So as mentioned, the main repo is very active, 80 plus PRs per week. The Gatsby plugin library is now up to 569 plugins, which is pretty remarkable given only 9 months ago we were like around 120 or so. And then now we're up to like 1,400 contributors and 16,000 Twitter followers, 28,000 GitHub stars. Usage is substantial, so about 500,000 downloads per month. A lot of the plugins are getting 100K plus downloads per month. And Built with Report, some around 15K live websites and growing quickly. Yeah, and it's also just really kind of gratifying to see world-class teams are picking Gatsby to build sites. So the React, probably a few of you have been to this website. So this is built with Gatsby. Flamingo, which is Harry's women's brand, launched recently a few months ago with a really slick new Gatsby commerce site. And then Hopper, the very popular travel app, recently relaunched a website with a very slick Gatsby website. Cool. So wanted to switch gears a bit and get a little mildly academic and talk about kind of an innovation framework called jobs to be done. And the idea of like jobs to be done is that any product or any service we buy or use that product or service or tool in order to do a job that we have. So example would be, I am here and I want to be moved to San Francisco. And so we could hire any number of tools or services or whatever to complete that job for us. And so if we look like back in history, in 1000 AD, what we would hire would be like walking or get a horse. 1800, walk, horse, carriage. Then there came railroads, and then cars. And then these days, you can just pull out your smartphone and get a Uber or Lyft. And the point of this is that, for when you're thinking about like how to like improve or innovate something, you have to like identify what is like the core job that people are using different tools for, and then you need to like innovate within still fulfilling that need, but do it in new, better, cheaper, more convenient, whatever type ways. And so innovative tech, it's always solving the same job to be done, but in new ways. And so what jobs do we hire the web for? Just a few options. We use the web to distribute content, provide services, social connection, entertainment. So if we look at, so if we look at kind of the job distributing content, like you wrote this beautiful essay and you want the whole world to read it, how do you distribute that? If you go, so what I'm going to do is like kind of like with the transportation, like go back and look at different eras. So if we look at different eras, we can kind of grade them on cost of delivering the content, on security, on speed. Someone's calling me. Wait, I'm mute now.
Yes.
Okay, they're muted. Okay. So cost, security, speed, and scalability. So 1000 AD, the king has a message, and he wants to send it out. And so cost, probably going to use horse and messengers, and they're not particularly cheap. So only kings really are sending messages around to all the villages. Security, reasonable. You know, if you got swords, and then you have like the wax sealed messages. So you know, everyone's pretty sure that the message that arrives is actually from the king. Speed, pretty mediocre, at least by our standards. It could take weeks to get to outlying districts. And scalability, I mean, depends on the king, I guess, how many horses, you know, horsemen and messengers they have. But anyways, it's not super scalable. So 1800, now we have printing presses. So they're doing the same job. You have an essay or something, you want to like distribute it out. So cost, they have a very high fixed cost. Marginal cost is fine. Distribution costs are like pretty okay. You get little 12-year-olds to like run around with newspapers or something. Security, pretty good. Like not that many people have presses, so not too many people are duplicating content or modifying content. Speed, so newspapers are like distributing daily, so that's quite quick. And you know, if you buy a book and get it by post, you know, that gets in like a few days. And scalability is quite high too. Like this, I was actually looking up like how many different countries, how many books they printed. So UK between 1751 and 1800 printed 1.3 million books, which is, you know, quite a few books for a country that was something like 1 million people or whatever back then. Okay, jump forward to 1994, and we have Microsoft Encarta, which is one of the first CD-ROM encyclopedias. And I actually found, so I read some like news articles at the time, like it was just crazy time because, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica was, you know, a big deal back in the 80s, and then these came along and it says, for the price of a high-end encyclopedia set, you get a computer that could run an encyclopedia app and basically everything else under the sun. And so like overnight, like printed encyclopedias, that market just cratered because everyone was like, huh, we have these like Bamam's books, or we can just get a computer and get a CD-ROM with basically all the same content. So cost, CD-ROMs are cheap to mail, so that's nice. Security, it's hard to hack. Speed's not too bad. Takes a few days to send all the content in post. And scalability is quite nice because CDs are very cheap to manufacture at scale. So 1996, jump forward 2 years, and now the internet and the web is, well, the internet's been going for a while, but anyways, the web is up and running, and yeah, so the first CMS launches, well, commercial CMS anyways, and hundreds follow, and CMSs. So back then, CMSs were expensive. 200K license, and you had to buy your own hardware and provision it all. But nice thing though is that once it was up and running, your marginal costs were very low, so that's nice. Security is pretty good. It was like delivering, but server software, of course, can be hacked. And speed, very fast compared to delivering books. And scalability is quite nice as long as you have big servers and expert engineers. So now that brings us to 2015 when Gatsby came around. And cost is free. I should have an asterisk there, I guess. But anyways, free for many, for many people. Security is amazing. No server software to hack. Speed is blazingly fast. Scalability is amazing because, you know, CDNs do all the dirty work. Yeah, so this is an example of how we could take like one of the jobs that, you know, that all of us in this room care about, like it's delivering content to other people, and we can see how over time technology has improved, and, you know, we've been able to like, you know, create a lot of innovations which have dramatically improved our ability, you know, to get that job done, both in speed, cost, security, and a lot of other nice features. Gatsby's awesome. People love Gatsby. These are some recent tweets that I liked. I love Gatsby.js, feeling so productive. Gatsby is magic. And then Dan Evermoff, Mr. React, he said, don't mean to overhype it and know it has its warts, but Gatsby.js blog authoring experience is incredible. Hot reloading feels an instant. I write posts and tweak styles or layout and see my changes reflected in real time. This was my dream. And I'll note that he said, don't mean to overhype it, but then it got 1,600 likes, so he failed at his objective. But, I don't know. So Gatsby is still young. I think we're doing super well in a lot of areas, but as far as the creating like this full content mesh story where you can take a headless CMS and Gatsby, provision backend functionality, and the whole thing just kind of flows and smooth. That story is still developing. Some jobs that people turn to CMSs for are still difficult to do, without a doubt. But we're in a really great spot for early adopters. A lot of people are adopting Gatsby. We have 15,000 sites and growing. Early adopters can work around rough edges and missing pieces, and they often have special needs. That they're turning to Gatsby because Gatsby fulfills those really, really, really well. And so great teams are successful at making the headless journey. And so our goal as as a project and as a company is to kind of like make this journey like really smooth, so that everyone can kind of get the benefits that you get from adopting kind of modern web tooling, and the really low, in the simplicity and low cost and performance of static assets. But still, so leaving CMS means handling extra complexity, because CMS basically kind of encapsulates a lot of stuff inside of it and hides a lot of things from you. And so once you go headless, all that complexity that was formerly kind of encapsulated in there now kind of drifts out. But Gatsby can help. So kind of moving to, so hard parts about going headless. First would be, so going headless, you lose preview. You lose fast deployment of changes. The difficulty of like integrating things together, the complexity is now kind of on you. And also the getting started story is not nearly as good compared to a CMS. And so our roadmap, for right now is to fix those. And so first thing is like instant preview. So content editors are just like developers. If you're developing a site, you want to make changes and see immediately the effect of your change. And so content editors need that same experience, that if you have like a long page and you're making a bunch of complex changes, you're not going to want to deploy that unless you can see what it's going to look like before it goes live. And just like us, we want instant feedback. And so content editors need that as well. And so towards that end, we've been working to develop a service we call Gatsby Preview. It's an alpha right now. We're launching the beta soon. And a colleague, Andrew, over here, he's going to be Andrew. So he's going to be talking a lot more about Gatsby Preview this afternoon, so I won't spoil his talk. And so we're launching Gatsby Preview with support for Contentful, but the underlying way we do it is very easily portable to a lot of other services. And so we'll be adding support for other headless CMSs, plus like traditional CMSs like Drupal and WordPress post beta launch. Another kind of challenge with going headless is that you lose kind of fast deployment of changes, particularly like content changes. So if you show someone, kind of a headless CMS Gatsby site, you show a content person, it's like, okay, you're going to make a change, you click save, and then at some point in the future it's going to go live, they get really confused because they're used to with a CMS that you make a change and it's immediately live on the internet. And so Gatsby builds can take 45 plus seconds if all things are going well, and that's not nice. So our goal is to solve that and make Gatsby builds essentially like disappear, so that somebody can have the same experience they have with CMS, where they save content and it goes live. So we've been talking a lot about this, and we're not quite right. I mean, I don't have any like announcement that like this is done and you can start using it or something yet. But I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about kind of how it works, just to kind of give you a sense of how we're approaching the problem. So first is kind of back up a bit, like what is a static site? And the answer is it's basically a pre-built cache. You have every possible thing that the site could be, and you build it ahead of time. And then, so it's like a cache. So it's like CMSs do something similar as a static site generator, but they generate their cache at runtime, where static sites build their cache at build time. But they effectively do the same thing, which is you have HTML that you can just serve very quickly. You can serve very quickly to users. But the problem with like runtime caching is that it gets like nutty complicated at scale. Like I used to work at a company called Pantheon, which does like Drupal and WordPress hosting, and it was pretty insane like what we had to do to like keep caching going for like some very high scale sites, and all that complexity comes from like the runtime caching. So if you move into build time, it just gets a lot simpler. So if you look at kind of like the broad categories of data processing, static site generators are what's called like batch processing. And so batch processing has a long and storied history in the computer world. So it kind of started, back in the early days of computers, and like you had like these large companies, and they had lots of kind of things happening, So like, say you're Walmart, people are making purchases. And a very handy thing to know if you're Walmart is like how much you make each day. Like what is our daily revenues? And of course, though, like even back in the early days of computing, Walmart had like lots of stores, and actually maybe they didn't. Okay, maybe that's a bad example. Say some other big company that was actually big back in the 60s. Walmart wasn't big back then. Anyways, a large company, lots of revenues. They want to see how much they made each day. And so at the end of each day, they kick off a job to like go through all the different accounting transactions and then come up with a number, which is, how much they made the previous day. So then when executive comes in the next morning, they say, hey, what was our revenue? And it comes back instantly instead of, taking a half hour or whatever it would be. So that's batch processing. It says, if you know you're going to need something and it's expensive, do it ahead of time so you don't have to wait. That's very nice. But batch processing has downsides, which is the data quickly gets out of date. If you update your revenues once a day and you're halfway through the day, you still don't know, you have no idea what's going on that day. You just know about the previous day. So it's nice data, but it's out of date data. And so static site generators, because they're batch processors, they inherit the same problem, which is, sites take time to update and are often out of date. Like we discussed earlier, content editors expect sites to update immediately. And there's large classes of websites, media sports and certain types of e-commerce sites that really demand kind of near real-time, data updates. Like if you're looking at a sports website and it shows you the score 5 minutes ago, that's actually not very interesting. Unless the game's over. But anyways, so as a result of that, static site generators are kind of limited in the, despite all the advantages they have, both in developer experience and in, kind of like DevOps experience and the user experience, CMSs completely dominate static site generators. If you look at the, the kind of the market, breakdown, static site generators are well less than 1% of the web, where CMSs are, 50, 60% of the web or so. And it's largely due to this kind of problem where static site generators are only suitable if you don't need to update data quickly. But so businesses though had the same problem. So they had the same problem with like batch processing. They're like, hey, this isn't that great for a lot of stuff. We really actually need real-time data. And so technology called like stream processing was invented to kind of solve this. And so we believe that, like the same kind of innovations that kind of came out of stream processing could be applied to building sites as well. And so instead of sites, being rebuilt, kind of a batch sort of thing where you're like, okay, some changes happen, let's rebuild everything. Instead, you can think of it as, one thing changes and you only do like a small little incremental build. And the result of which is that the builds are pretty real time. And so all static site generators to date, including Gatsby currently, are kind of batch processing static site generators. But we believe that the next generation will all be based on stream processing. My emoji disappeared too. Anyways, so what if I told you the build could disappear? Rectangle. Anyways, so this is the future of Gatsby, real-time incremental builds. Anyways, and so once you go to this once we've made the switch, which we're working on, then all sorts of things become possible. All sorts of new types of sites, are then amenable to being, built with Gatsby. But also you can just do like weird stuff, like user-generated content could be statically built because, somebody adds a comment, reloads, it's already there, in the static thing. So yeah, status update, like I said, it's not done. It's a hard problem, but we're making great progress. The design of Gatsby from V1 on has been, kind of oriented around this sort of making everything event-based, incremental builds possible. And so post-launch of Gatsby Preview, this will be a major focus, which is like launching a build service with incremental build support. And so you will like hook up your CMS, like your GitHub repo, et cetera, and then we'll build that and push out incremental updates to kind of wherever. But stuff like S3, GCP, Azure buckets, hosting services like Netlify and so forth will be kind of top of mind and rolling this out. Cool. And so next kind of really hard problem is integrating services together. So you move to this world where you're not running your own software, you're not running a CMS, you're just clicking a button and a bunch of different things like e-commerce, Shopify, Contentful for my CMS, on and on and on. Like all these things are just like provisioned automatically. You're like, yay, this is also easy. But then you have to like figure out actually how to like integrate them all together. You have to read a bunch of API docs. You have to like set up webhooks. You have to, anyways, API keys. There's a long list of things you have to do actually at this point. So it's easier, strictly speaking, it's a lot easier, but it's like, if you don't know how, it's easier once you know how to do it, I guess. If you don't know how to do it, it's not very easy. Anyways, so even if there's a big process, a big cliff or a big step up for actually figuring this stuff out, and then there's still a fair bit of work, each incremental project to make it work. And so, Gatsby's working on solving these problems. So one thing we're doing is we're heavily investing in our OSS plugins because we have integration plugins for a lot of different services, and we can, in kind of this OSS code, we can go long ways towards smoothing over kind of these integration problems through kind of like shared community efforts around building out great integrations, which really pays off then because you can just drop in a plug. You can say, I want to try the service out. You drop in a plugin, and then and then you can immediately start querying data with GraphQL. So that helps out a ton. Something else we can do too with Gatsby Cloud is we can automate a lot of the setting up of these services. So you can add a site to Gatsby Cloud, and it'll be like, oh, like you're using this headless CMS, and then we can just set up webhooks for you and other parts of the integration that will just kind of make the whole experience, fly along. Also, part of this integration story is that we see the future as kind of all GraphQL all the time, and more services are kind of seeing the same future and adding native GraphQL APIs. And a few months ago, we added support for natively querying third-party GraphQL's APIs within Gatsby. And so you can take a GraphQL API and just drop it into your site config, and then immediately start querying that. So that makes integrations even more trivial, which we're a big fan of. One downside to that though is that a big part of the benefit of Gatsby is that you have kind of these transformer plugins. So you have data in some format, and then you want to like transform it along the way before you put it into your website. So that could be like image transformations, that could be like markdown to HTML, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the most common ones. But so anyways, when you go to like stitching in these third-party GraphQL APIs, it's great, but then you lose out on the transformers that Gatsby gives you. And so we have an RFC up for allowing you to kind of directly transform data from these third-party APIs, which will be really sweet. And yeah, there's a lot of interest from different vendors who are working on these GraphQL APIs. And then another problem too is solving the getting started problem. So most teams are new to this world. It's if you've been building sites with CMSs or even other static site generators, jumping to like Gatsby and React and headless CMSs can feel like a lot to learn. And there's a lot of new concept techniques and tools. So yeah, so we're investing heavily in just documenting everything. So in the last year, we 4x'd the number of docs. So now on gatsbyjs.org, it's like we have an equivalent of a 500-page book. So if you're looking for a good page turner, you can just open up the .org docs and read away for a few days. Yeah, we're also working on, so kind of everyone at the company shares responsibility right now of writing docs. The OSS maintainers, my co-founder and I, a lot of other people have contributed to the docs, and a lot of community members, of course, too, have contributed to docs. But this is really just like, proving to be just like a massive undertaking. So we're hiring also full-time doc specialists. And then another big part of like the getting started story is, Gatsby is like a fairly low-level tool. It can do like a lot of different things. It can do docs, it can do marketing sites, it can do blogs, it can do kind of image-heavy media sites. It can do, it's a great foundation for doing like SaaS apps, e-commerce. It can do all sorts of different stuff. But the tricky part is, okay, like you're starting here at the base, and how do you build up to the particular use case that you're trying to solve? And so, to kind of like help out with that, we're adding theme support, which will enable kind of shareable, pre-built configs that are oriented towards certain use cases. And so you're like, hey, I want to try out an e-commerce site. You can just install a Gatsby e-commerce theme, and presto changeo, you'll have in minutes, literally minutes, like a working Gatsby e-commerce site. And so this also, we're gonna have like a talk focus on this, so I won't talk more. So Chris over there is gonna speak on it. So I won't say any more, just spoil his goodness. Cool, so yeah, what's the future? It's a great question. So one big part, I think, of the future is that this content mesh world where you're pulling in content and functionality from these different backends. Like, there's already literally hundreds of services that you could use in building a website, but I think we're just barely getting started. I anticipate that in the future there'll be like tens of thousands of kind of little one-off backend services that you can use to build things. So it's like any sort of need you might have in building a website that currently is, you probably have to like start writing custom code. You can just like search a marketplace and find whatever it is that you need. And Gatsby aims to be like a big part of that, which is it'll have great integrations with all these, and that you'll kind of like create a site and you'll be composing it from like 10 different services, and all of those will be pushing events into our systems, which will be triggering real-time builds and deploys. Kind of keep the whole thing humming along. We also, are laying the foundations of, a rich ecosystem of themes and ready-to-use components, which can dramatically simplify, the getting started, plus, reuse across for functionality, like front-end functionality across sites. Also, React is really interesting because it's enabling kind of entirely new types of design tooling. So FrameRex, if you've seen that, is kind of like is a great example of that that's gotten a lot of press. Just kind of component-based design is kind of coming on in a big way versus kind of the former kind of pixel-based design. So it's like design tools that actually understand what you're building and understand kind of the semantics of it, help you move much faster and build much better stuff. And we also are very interested in working to create design tooling that's not just focused on like React, but also like Gatsby, that understands Gatsby as well. So yeah, so the future is bright, and so looking forward to building it with y'all.